Retirement is often seen as a destination, but we believe it's an opportunity to pursue your passions, realize your dreams, and live a purposeful life. Great decisions, incredible lives. Retire with Intention podcast is about more than just money. It's about embracing the things that truly matter, the experiences, the relationships, and the impact you leave behind. Here is your host, John Creekmur.
Hey, John here. Welcome back to Great Decisions, Incredible Lives. And I'll tell you what, I am so pumped up today to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Terry Tucker, and got to know Terry, and his story is phenomenal and tremendous resource. And I know all of you are so blessed today with the things we're walking through. And keep in mind, everybody, I am so encouraged hearing feedback from each of you. And you send in direct messages, and you've texted, and you've called the office, you left comments as far as on different podcasts. Please keep that feedback coming back as far as things that you're learning, the way you're implementing principles to live that your own definition of what that incredible life is. And it's a way for us to grow that community and also to increase the impact that we're having in the world at large. And thank you so much for the feedback. And I so much look forward to hearing from you even after today's episode. And so I'm interested in, as far as to hear from you all, as far as the journey that we're on and the message we given today. So Terry Tucker, it comes to us today. He's going to be sharing things from a lot of different things in his life, from a background. And you're going to see he's got a phenomenal background and just an incredible resource, and has been connected in a lot of different ways. And right now, a stage of his journey is really has having a platform to encourage people, and really kind of his message is it morphs so well into what we do right here on this podcast. And so excited to give you a little background on him, but also to hear from him directly. Hey, Terry, welcome to the show. Can you kind of walk through here at the beginning a little bit of your background and maybe where you've been, what do you do, and kind of introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. Well, John, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. My name is Terry Tucker. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I actually went to college at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina to play basketball, despite having 3 knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this is long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out at Wendy's. Then I moved to hospital administration. I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball when we lived in Texas, but for the last 12 years now have been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for almost 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
In the Space Force?
Yes.
So now that's a brand new branch, isn't it?
It is. I think it started in the last year of the Trump administration.
Oh, wow. It's amazing how things have changed with technology. It's really getting me to thinking. You mentioned dating you, as far as age. I mean, it's one of those things, whenever I see a new technology, it's like, what's going on? And I am amazed at what's happening there. But as we see technology kind of come about, it's obviously impacting our military presence in some big ways. Some of the things, the stories that we're hearing now from friends in the military and even seeing on the news, is amazing how that is technology is transforming things. But we also know that all of life really is one great big transformation. And sometimes that transformation happens from technology, but oftentimes it happens from life and the things that we're going through. And your professional journey really speaks to that. And so you'd mentioned that you were a SWAT hostage negotiator. How did you transition into that role, Terry? Is that an area of interest, or is that some area that you said, hey, I'm 6'8", I can intimidate people? Or how did you get there?
Yeah, so when I became a police officer, most SWAT teams, whether they're metropolitan police departments or sheriff's departments, whoever it is, those are usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. And I've always wanted to be part of the best in my life. So when there was an opening for a person on the negotiating team, I put in for it. And I had to do the physical fitness part of it, to run a mile and a half and do push-ups and sit-ups. I had to meet with the psychologist. I had to take psychological exams, meet with the command staff, and then meet with the team. And it was an all or nothing. If everybody gave you a thumbs up, you got on the team. If one person said, I've worked with Terry before, he's difficult to work with, I don't think he should be on the team, you didn't get on. And so I went through all that and was fortunate enough to get a thumbs up from everybody on the team. And that started a 4.5-year odyssey of being in some really interesting situations, getting some great training, working with some great people, and hopefully making a difference in some of the people's lives that we interacted with.
Yeah. So with that background, you went from that then to coaching girls high school basketball. And so that's, again, another incredible change. I know professionally at that time, you were also doing security as far as consulting, as far as with schools. And so you were bringing into that military background and probably in some of the training from the Citadel as far as into that professionally. But when you kind of think about the different varied background that you have had, how can you see how that professional experience, how has that influenced your perspective, let's even say as far as on this stage of life and on future stages of life?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. You know, I have to go back literally to my early days. My parents taught us, my brothers and I, the importance of family, of loving each other, caring for each other, supporting each other. And we were all athletes. My youngest brother was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. My middle brother was a Division II All-American in basketball, was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers. But we're all an inch apart height-wise. So I've got 6'8", 6'7", 6'6", and 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, in front of you. But our 5'8" mother was the boss. It didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it goes. And so my parents taught us that everybody was important, that everybody mattered. And that was an incredibly important thing when I was a negotiator and when I was a police officer. You may pull somebody over as a police officer, and you have to keep in mind that for them, it may be the scariest thing that happens to them all year. For you, it's the third traffic stop of the night. So you have to keep that in perspective. And the same thing with negotiating. One of the things that we used to do to try to change behavior is what we call tactical empathy. You can get rid of the word tactical and just use empathy, I think, for us. And that was basically help me understand where you're coming from. Not necessarily agree with it. If I'm negotiating with a homicide suspect, I'm not going to agree that the fact that you murdered somebody was a good thing, but I want to understand where you're coming from, because empathy builds trust, and trust gets to a point where you can change behavior. And as negotiators, that's exactly what we were trying to do, change people's behavior. Because, let's face it, if you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, you're probably having the worst day of your life up to this point.
Oh, for sure. And I think empathy is such a big word and it's such a big concept to really live life by. It's really walking through, trying to understand the circumstance of life an individual is walking through. I've even learned, Terry, that as far as when I work with couples, and when it comes to their finances, when it comes to their planning for retirement, to really have empathy of their background and the things they've walked through individually, and how that sets up then for really decisions they have to make regarding their finances. And so, folks, empathy is such a critical thing. And I'd encourage you to do some additional reading on empathy and empathy for others, because it is a life changer whenever you have empathy, just in the way we deal and work through people. So it's not just for hostage negotiations, it's for everyday things of life, right? And even walking through life. I was just, Stacy and I were just finishing up working with some folks going through tremendous loss of a child. And just to walk into that room and have empathy for them as they're walking through that, it really set things up to have a good, strong conversation with them on how to navigate that. And so empathy, guys, is just a critical thing. Terry, thanks for bringing that up. That was something I had not thought of walking through this today, but that could be a huge takeaway for people. I was thinking of another word, that's resilience. I know that you had mentioned that you've had an 11-year journey now as far as with cancer. And walking through that, and man, that's a long journey. And so resilience, and you're such a the positive individual. You're so focused on that positivity. And I know in the podcast, we can't see looks on faces, but folks, Terry's always smiling and he's laughing. And, it's just a positive person that really is just blessing me today. So that positivity. Can you share how your battle with cancer has impacted your outlook on maybe life, even next stage for some things as far as next stage of life, maybe like a retirement or whatever that might be, or even aging? Can you kind of share that perspective?
Sure. I was diagnosed with a rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. It affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. My form has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. Mine appeared on the bottom of the foot. This was back in 2012. And I was told when I was diagnosed that more than likely I would be dead in 2 years. They had nothing to offer me in terms of treatment other than surgery. If they could cut it out, they would. Otherwise, there was nothing they could do for me. So I thought, well, you've given me a death sentence. Maybe I can try to turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And that's what I've been trying to do for these last almost, 12 years now. I was on a medication for 5 years that gave me severe flu-like symptoms every week after I took the injection. So I had the flu every week for 5 years. And as my oncologist used to say, that's not a cure. We're just trying to kick the can down the road for you. I had my foot amputated in 2018. I had my leg amputated in 2020, and I still have tumors in my lungs, which I'm being treated for. And I get the question a lot. You were a college athlete, you were in law enforcement, you did a lot of physical things in your life. How do you reconcile the fact now that you're in a wheelchair, you don't have a leg, you still have tumors in your lungs? And my response to that is, when you can't do what you were good at, you do what's important. And that's what I've been trying to do for these last 12 years. And certainly since I've had my leg amputated, my life has really changed. And so you get to a point where you understand what's important in life. And was playing basketball important in the scheme of things? Not really. I mean, being in law enforcement, I probably helped some people. But now, my purpose is to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world with whatever time that I have left. So that's being resilient and doing things like this, being on a show with you and getting to talk to you, that energizes me. That gives me that energy to continue to move forward, because I'm treated every week, every 3 weeks for an entire week at the hospital. So I get these 2-week cycles that I'm off, and having conversations with you gives me the reason to keep going on.
Wow. What a great message. And I mean, it really talks about just that pursuit of excellence in every area of your life, regardless of the circumstances. And that made me think about your book, Sustainable Excellence. It's one of these things. Can you walk through, what were you thinking of, first of all, the title, Sustainable Excellence, and what does that mean to you? And why was that chosen as the title? And then from there, can you give some background as far as the principles that you really want to communicate in that book?
Yeah, I never set out to write a book. As a matter of fact, I really kind of sort of poo-pooed it. I was like, I don't really want to do this. And, there's sort of an old joke that says, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never talked to me in any way, shape, or form. But what I believe God did was put people in my life, and put enough people in my life that kept making the same suggestion. Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should write a book. Yeah. And I think I'm smart enough to kind of, when that happens, to sort of buck up and say, I got to pay attention to what's going on here. So I always say I wrote the book, but it really was something that was inspired by something bigger than me. And Sustainable Excellence, the title, people always ask me, well, what is excellence? And my response is, I don't know. And they're like, what do you mean you don't know? You wrote the book. How could you possibly not know what excellence is? And my response to that is, kind of like beauty, I think excellence is in the eye of the beholder. You have to define for yourself what excellence looks like in your life. But then how do you sustain it? How do you get to a point where you continue to grow? And I think what so many people do, and I've seen people do this, they get to the top of the mountain and then they set back and they put their feet up on the desk, they pour themselves a drink and they're like, you know what? I've arrived, I've made it. And then what happens? 6 months later, a year later, boom, somebody passes them up and they're like, what happened? Well, what happened is you didn't grow, you didn't innovate, you didn't find new ways to deliver your service. I mean, it works in business, it works in your field, it works in sports, it works in the arts, it works in everything. How do you continue to sustain, to grow, to get better? So that's kind of sustainable excellence in a nutshell. The principles really were developed based on a young man who reached out to me on social media and said, what do you think are the most important things I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And John, I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. I wanted to see if I could go deeper. And so I took some time and took some notes and eventually had these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life who emulates this principle. So literally during the months I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be. I'll give you a couple of the principles. One of them is very important to me because I've done it in my life, and I'm not proud to say that I have done it. And it's this: most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I know I've done that in my life. I wanted to start something. It's like, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And I always, especially when I have an opportunity to talk to young people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be those things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Yeah, that is a key principle. And I think I see it in my own life, Terry. It's like I think back to the times that you're saying stories of times when it's like, why did I not do that? Why did I not step through that opportunity? It has to do with fear. And so I was actually process-based with fear instead of actually thinking through the process the way I should have. So phenomenal principle. So you actually have 10 principles inside the book that came off from that communication. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them have to do with things I've learned over my life. There's one about being curious. We were always taught as negotiators to use a curious voice when we were talking to people, and to slow down and to do things like that. And that really is more about being a lifelong learner. I want to be one of those people. I want to die learning. I don't ever want to think, hey, I know it all. I've got it all figured out, because I'm 64 years old and I haven't figured it all out yet. So.
I love the lifelong learner. It's a principle we taught with our own kids for so many years. And you're right. I think the older I get now, I'm a decade younger than you, but it's kind of like I'm starting to realize there's more in this world I don't know than what I've ever known. And it's like, man, you got to be a lifelong learner. I love that phrase, be curious. And I know a lot of people watched on Apple with Ted Lasso, as far as over there, one of the scenes he talked about being curious. And it's like, I think that's something that we all need to be growing on, is just being curious and continuing to learn. And as far as everyone listening, if you would love to get a copy of Sustainable Excellence, definitely check out the show notes. As far as on the podcast, we'll have a link over as far as to Amazon, be a copy of that. And so make sure you check out the show notes for that. Phenomenal book, very impactful as far as 10 principles, as far as to lead an extraordinary life. And when I was thinking about that, a lifelong learner, can you kind of talk a minute? I mean, 64, you've gone through a lot in life, Terry, professionally, gone through a lot. You've kind of walked through some career change. You've also had some health things you've worked through. Talking about being curious, can you kind of walk through a little bit how people can really continue to find opportunities for personal growth, self-improvement, learning as far as when they go through the retirement or also that next stage of life? Are there some principles or ways they can keep on doing that?
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to start with the understanding that there's no such thing as a perfect anything, a perfect job, a perfect person, a perfect relationship. There's no such thing as anything perfect. So if you're looking for something perfect, you're going to be sorely disappointed. I always suggest to people that we all have unique gifts and talents that were given to us by our Creator. Use those gifts and talents. Try new things. Jesse Itzler is the husband of Sarah Blakely. And Sarah Blakely started Spanx, which is a woman's undergarment company. And Itzler tells the story. He said she started that company with one prototype and $5,000 and didn't know all kinds of things. And what he says, and the point of his story is that if she would have waited until everything lined up perfectly, he said, I guarantee you somebody else would have figured that idea out and run with it. You just have to jump in with both feet, figure it out, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes. I love the quote from Nelson Mandela, who said, I never lose. I either learn or I win. Yeah. So understand that the road to success is paved with failure. You're going to have to make mistakes, but mistakes are only bad if you don't learn from them. So learn the things that you're supposed to learn. Do things. And we get paralyzed, I think, John, because we get to a point where it's like, I don't know where to start. Right where you are is perfectly fine to start. Just jump in and figure it out. Don't try to figure things out like, I gotta wait till this happens. No, you don't. Start right now. Whatever will happen will happen. I always like the saying that whatever happens to you has been waiting to happen to you since the beginning of time. So understand that these things are going to happen. I mean, things are going to happen, good things, bad things, whatever it is. You've got to understand you have unique gifts and talents. Use those for the betterment of yourself, the betterment of your community, the betterment of your world, and just see where your life goes. And I'll end with this quick story. Most of us know Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, on his television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He educated so many young people, including me growing up. When Fred Rogers died in 2003, his family was going through his effects, and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written 4 simple words. Life is for service. Use your gifts in service of mankind.
A phenomenal story. I had never heard that before. So life is for service. And I think oftentimes we go through stages of life, we look at things that happen to us, and I love your quote there, that anything that's happened to you has
been waiting to happen since the beginning of time.
Since the beginning of time. I mean, that's a phenomenal concept to recognize that, and yet we go through life, and sometimes we use that to hold us back from that time of service, from that point of impact. And it's about really seizing the day and really just going through, walking through, and serving others. And phenomenal principle. Terry, also I look at the clock and it's like, man, we've been kind of going here for a while. I want to be kind of, make sure I'm understanding everyone's time and your time. Can you kind of walk through, maybe in closing or in summary, just any key thoughts or principles you want to leave with people as far as we're trying to walk them through and helping them make great decisions, live an incredible life, some key things for them to keep in mind?
Yeah, let me just end with a story. I've always been a big fan of Westerns growing up. When I was young, my mom and dad used to let me stay up late and watch, Bonanza and Gunsmoke, and my favorite was Wild Wild West. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. May have seen it. It was a huge blockbuster. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were 2 living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made-up characters just for the movie. Now, Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt Earp had been some form of a lawman almost his entire life. And somehow these 2 men from entirely opposite backgrounds formed this incredibly close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc Holliday is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. The real Doc Holliday died at that sanitarium. He's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money. He has no job. He has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the 2 men pass the time that way. And in almost the last scene of the movie, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all that I ever wanted. And then he looks at Wyatt. And he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal. There's just life. And get on with living yours. John, you and I probably know people. There's probably people out there listening to us that are sort of sitting back and saying, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. Or when that occurs, I'll have a successful life. Or when this transpires, I'll have a significant life. What I'd like to leave your listeners with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you're put on the face of this earth, use your unique gifts and talents, and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you two things. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
Terry, great story and great message. And thank you so much for the time you spent with us today, Terry. I really appreciate having you here. And thank you so much for the lesson. Everybody, make sure you check out show notes and find out information as far as to get more info from Terry. Phenomenal resource. And thank you so much again for being with us. And everybody, thank you for listening again to Great Decisions, Incredible Lives. And look forward to connecting with you again next week right here. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for listening to the Great Decisions, Incredible Lives, Retire with Intention podcast with host John Creekmer. Follow us on social media, visit our website, and join our community of like-minded individuals redefining retirement and living incredible lives. Please leave us a review and share our podcast with others who may benefit. We wish you a future filled with purpose, fulfillment, and the joy of living your incredible life in retirement.